FIFA sent a photographer to the press conference, not to document the questions, to document the answer. When journalists began pressing Gianni Infantino about the empty seats visible across multiple matches in the tournament's opening days, the rows of unoccupied chairs in Guadalajara, the patches of blue in Toronto, the sections that cameras kept finding in stadiums FIFA had promised would be full, the FIFA president did not offer numbers or explanations or apologies. He gestured to a spokesperson who produced a photograph, a different angle of the same stadium, fuller looking, more people visible. Here, the gesture implied, is the real picture. That photograph became one of the defining images of the 2026 World Cup's first week. Not because it proved anything, because of what sending it communicated about an organization that had spent 3 years promising the most attended, most celebrated, most atmospherically perfect World Cup in the history of the sport, and was now on day 2 dispatching photographers to find more flattering camera positions rather than explaining why the less flattering ones existed. This is the story of the empty seats. Not just the seats themselves, but the months of decisions that produced them. The pricing model that FIFA defended at every opportunity and then quietly dismantled weeks before kickoff. And the growing question about whether the organization that claims to be the guardian of the world's game has fundamentally misunderstood what its fans are willing to endure in exchange for a ticket. And it starts, like most things at this tournament, with a number that FIFA repeated so often it became background noise. 6 million tickets sold. Demand exceeding expectations by a factor of 10 or more. The biggest World Cup in history, 54 matches more than 2022, 3 host nations, 16 cities, a global audience projected north of 5 billion people. FIFA presented these numbers the way a company presents quarterly earnings that exceed projections, as evidence that every decision had been correct, that the skeptics had been wrong, that the tournament's unprecedented scale had been matched by unprecedented desire. And then the cameras went to Guadalajara, the second match of the tournament. South Korea versus Czech Republic. Not a marquee fixture, but not an insignificant one either. South Korea are a competitive football nation with a genuine global following. Czech Republic have earned their place at multiple major tournaments. The Estadio Akron, their venue, holds nearly 46,000 people. FIFA's official attendance figure was 44,985. The cameras showed something different. Sections in the middle of the stand, with row after row of empty seats. Not the kind of empty that arrives in the opening minutes before fans find their way from the concourse. The sustained, visible, documentable emptiness that persists through first halves and second halves, and the moments when goals are scored and the reaction shot sweeps across the crowd. And the crowd, in significant sections, is not there. The Mirror published its headline within hours. FIFA World Cup suffers immediate humiliation, with thousands of empty seats on very first day of competition. FIFA's response was the photograph, and then the statement that would follow the organization throughout the tournament's first 2 weeks. Official attendance figures reflect the number of tickets scanned and spectators present within the stadium footprint, rather than visual assessments of seating occupancy at any given moment during the match. Please note that during last night's match in Guadalajara, several ticketed fans could be seen standing in concourses rather than staying in their assigned seats. Fans in the concourse, 44,985 tickets scanned, and the cameras looking at empty seats across the venue for 90 minutes. Those two things cannot both be completely true. One of them requires a significant number of South Korea and Czech Republic supporters to have scanned their tickets, entered the building, gone to the concourse, and never found their way to their seats for the entirety of a World Cup match that those seats and their holders had presumably traveled a significant distance to attend. The explanation did not land, not with journalists, not with supporters watching the broadcast, not with the attorney generals of New York, New Jersey, California, and Texas, who had already opened investigations or raised formal concerns about FIFA's ticketing practices before a single ball had been kicked. But to understand why the seats were empty in Guadalajara, and why they were empty in Toronto, and why they were empty in match after match across the tournament's opening days, you have to go back further than the opening whistle. You have to go back to September of 2025, when FIFA opened its ticketing portal for the tournament it had described, without apparent irony, as the most accessible World Cup in history. The promise had been made years earlier, embedded in the original host bid documents, when the United States, Canada, and Mexico jointly presented their case to FIFA for the right to stage this tournament. A seat at the final, the document said, would cost a maximum of $1,550. By April 2026, the cheapest standard final ticket had reached $5,785. The most expensive hospitality seats hit $73,200. From $1,550 to $73,000 across the same tournament, the same stadium, the same event that was supposed to be the most accessible in history, is the distance between what FIFA promised and what FIFA delivered. Not an incremental adjustment to reflect changed market conditions. A price increase of roughly 5,000% on the premium end of the market, across a window of a few years, during which FIFA publicly defended every step of the escalation. The mechanism was new. FIFA introduced variable pricing to a World Cup for the first time, a system that adjusts costs based on algorithms tracking demand. They called it variable pricing rather than dynamic pricing, a distinction FIFA insisted was meaningful, and that most of the football world received as semantic. The consumer experience was identical in either case. The price you saw on Monday was not the price available on Tuesday. The seat you were willing to pay for on Wednesday was worth more on Thursday. And the seat you thought you had secured at one price could be worth significantly less by the time the tournament opened, because the supply was higher than the demand that FIFA's own demand projections had suggested. The $60 entry tier deserves its own examination, because Infantino mentioned it repeatedly in press conferences and in interviews as evidence that FIFA had made the tournament affordable. Our entry price, which is $60, is the lowest entry price of any of the American sports in the playoff phases. What he did not mention was the scale of that provision. According to Football Supporters Europe, the $60 tickets accounted for approximately 10% of each national association's allocation. In a stadium holding 80,000 people, 10% of a federation's allocation amounts to a few hundred seats. The $60 option, described by FIFA as its proof of accessibility, was functionally unavailable to the general public by the time general public sales opened. It had been distributed through federation channels before most fans had a chance to see it listed. Football Supporters Europe, which represents fan groups across the continent, filed a formal complaint with the European Commission in March, accusing FIFA of shutting ordinary fans out of the tournament with sky-high prices and describing the $60 tier as barely existing in any meaningful sense. Attorneys general in New York and New Jersey issued formal subpoenas to FIFA in the weeks before the tournament, citing reports that fans may have been misled about ticket locations and that FIFA's public statements about demand and availability had contributed to soaring resale prices. California and Texas raised their own concerns. 4 states in the host nation of the tournament, opening formal legal processes against the organization running it, before the opening ceremony had taken place. Donald Trump, not typically aligned with consumer protection arguments, told the New York Post he thought the ticket prices were too high. When the President of the United States, the same president whose administration FIFA had worked with extensively on tournament logistics, and whose company's unused office space in Trump Tower FIFA was renting, was publicly criticizing the ticket model, the political environment around the pricing controversy had become genuinely unusual. FIFA's response to all of it was consistent. The prices reflected the North American market. 6 million tickets had been sold. Demand had exceeded expectations by a factor of 10. The tournament was a success by every commercial metric. And then, in the first week of June, with 2 weeks to go before the opening match, FIFA quietly slashed prices across all 104 matches. Quietly, without a press conference, without a statement explaining what had changed. A last-minute reduction across the entire tournament's pricing architecture, 2 weeks before kickoff, after months of publicly defending the model that had produced those prices as a reflection of authentic market demand. Of its block-booked hotel rooms across major host cities. 70%. The hotel blocks that businesses had structured entire summer seasons around, that had informed hiring decisions and revenue forecasts and the commercial planning of thousands of enterprises in 16 cities across 3 countries, released back to the market because the wave that was supposed to arrive did not come in the numbers or at the price points FIFA had projected. The American Hotel and Lodging Association surveyed its members. The word that came back from respondents describing the tournament's impact on their businesses was a single word: non-event. Just days before kickoff, reports estimated there were 180,000 unsold tickets. That number, in the context of a tournament FIFA had described as selling out at unprecedented speed, required some explanation. The explanation that emerged from analysts and sports business journalists covering the tournament was not complicated. FIFA had mispriced the demand. Not the total demand for football, which was genuine. The demand for tickets at these specific prices, in these specific conditions, requiring these specific travel arrangements, during a period when European fans faced visa uncertainty, when Iranian supporters could not enter the host country at all, when the median resale price for group stage matches had fallen 23% between April and May as the market corrected toward what actual buyers were actually willing to pay. The market had been telling FIFA this for months. The resale prices had been falling. The hotel rooms had been going unfilled. The secondary market had been repricing every ticket downward as the gap between FIFA supply and actual demand became impossible to conceal behind official statements about unprecedented interest. But FIFA had not listened to the market. It had listened to its own projections, built on assumptions about North American consumer behavior that proved to be accurate for premium buyers and inaccurate for the broader fan base that makes football what it is. And then the tournament began, and the cameras went to the seats that weren't filled. And the photograph was sent to the press conference. The Canada match at BMO Field in Toronto told a specific and pointed version of the story. Canada, one of the 3 host nations. Their first World Cup home match in over 40 years. The kind of fixture that should produce the automatic sold out that national pride and historical occasion deliver without any marketing assistance. The attendance was 43,002 in a venue holding 44,315. Over 1,000 seats unsold at Canada's own World Cup. For their first home World Cup match in living memory, the unsold tickets were still visible on the ticketing platform in the hours before kickoff. Category 1 and Category 2 seats, priced between $1,645 and $2,240. Seats that remained available because the price they were listed at exceeded what the Canadian supporters who wanted to be in that building were willing or able to pay. Not seats that nobody wanted. Seats that everyone wanted, at a price FIFA had decided to set higher than the demand would support. That is the distinction that sits at the center of every empty row in every venue across the tournament's first 2 weeks. FIFA did not fail to generate interest in the matches. It generated enormous interest. 6 million tickets were scanned. Millions of people attended. The Mexico opener was 80,000 people, making extraordinary noise in one of football's most celebrated venues. The atmosphere was genuine and real and captured exactly what a World Cup opener should be. But the pricing model that was supposed to generate a 6-fold increase in FIFA's ticket revenue compared to Qatar created a floor price for attending that a significant proportion of the actual football fan base, the people who follow teams across tournaments and travel specifically for these fixtures, could not or chose not to meet. And the gap between those people and the empty seats they left behind is visible to every camera crew looking for an establishing shot at a group stage match. Infantino's comparison to the NBA Finals became the most quoted line of his pre-tournament press conference. Our entry price, which is $60, is the lowest entry price of any of the American sports in the playoff phases. The sentence was constructed to position a World Cup group stage match as equivalent to a conference final or a championship series. And in some markets, for some sports, that positioning might work. For a football fan base built on decades of traveling to tournaments with limited budgets, sleeping in cars and hostels, and booking flights 18 months in advance to afford the journey, the comparison to the NBA Finals is not a defense. It is the description of the problem. The sport that has always defined itself partly by being accessible, by being the game that exists in every country, that requires only a ball and a flat surface, that has produced its greatest moments in stadiums packed by people who spent everything they had to be there, was being priced in the style of a league that cost a month of Chicago rent to attend once. Football Supporters Europe's director, Ronan Ivane, described it plainly. FIFA's approach leaves loyal fans with a stark choice: pay up or lose out. Spoken about the people who make football what it is, at the biggest football tournament in history. Captures what is sitting in the empty seats across 16 cities. But here's the detail that no amount of photography or official statements can change, and that analysts covering the tournament's commercial performance keep returning to. FIFA may still hit its revenue targets. The Sports Business Journal data, suggesting 97% or higher occupancy at most matches, based on scanned tickets rather than visible occupancy, means the commercial case for the pricing model might ultimately be supported by the numbers, even when the visual evidence of the first 2 weeks suggests otherwise. Which would mean FIFA achieved its financial goal and produced a tournament where the images that defined its first week were empty seats in the home stadium of a host nation. A FIFA spokesperson delivering photographs to deflect press conference questions, and an organization that set out to build the most watched football event in history and found itself explaining to 4 state attorneys general why the fans who wanted to be there couldn't afford to get in. That is the tension FIFA is living with. Commercial success built on a pricing model that has produced the one image it spent months trying to prevent. The visible, undeniable camera-catching evidence that the tournament of the people was priced for someone else, and the fans who couldn't afford the seats are watching it at home. On the same broadcasts that keep finding the empty ones. What do you think? Did FIFA make a catastrophic miscalculation about what its fans were willing to pay? Or does the commercial success that appears to be coming anyway vindicate a strategy that simply produced bad optics? And when you look at the empty seats in Guadalajara and Toronto and ask who was supposed to be sitting there, do you see a pricing failure or a vision of what football is becoming? Leave it in the comments. These are the conversations this channel exists for.